Okay, so today we're going deep on sourdough bread.
Sourdough.
It's more than just a simple loaf, right?
Oh,
It's like
yeah. Wow.
this connection to history
Mhm.
and a totally unique flavor, and it's a real skill.
Like a craft. Yeah.
We've got a whole bunch of research here about its history and the science behind it, and some of the people who've made it famous, and some pretty interesting facts.
Yeah.
Our mission is to kind of bring you the highlights, the cool
Yeah.
stuff, the
Yeah.
things that are going to make you want to go bake a loaf.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing that really jumped out at me is that sourdough is like one of the oldest ways people figured out how to make bread rise.
It really is. It's
It's
ancient.
way before commercial yeast.
Thousands of years before commercial yeast came on the scene.
It's crazy.
It really is.
And we've got evidence here going all the way back to ancient Egypt, like
Yeah.
4000 BC.
Incredible.
That's so long ago.
Right.
And for thousands of years, that was like the way to do it.
Yeah, that was it.
The
And
OG method.
the OG method, right.
Yeah, and it wasn't just about the airy texture. It was actually easier for people to digest back then, and it helped it last longer.
Which is huge when you think about a world without refrigeration.
Yeah, makes
I
sense.
mean, that extended shelf life was vital.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
So what makes it sourdough?
Well, it's all about the starter.
The starter.
You could think of it as like a little community, a little ecosystem.
Okay.
It's a mix of flour and water,
Right.
but it's also got all these wild yeasts and bacteria living in it.
So it's alive.
It's alive.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, unlike commercial yeast, which is just one type of yeast usually,
Right.
a sourdough starter has a whole bunch of different microorganisms all hanging out together.
And that's what gives it that tangy flavor.
Exactly, and that chewy texture.
Yeah, I love that.
And the benefits go beyond that, too.
Really?
This slow fermentation process,
Mhm.
it does some cool things.
Like what?
Well, for one, it breaks down gluten.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, this isn't a cure for celiac disease or anything.
Right.
But for folks with mild gluten sensitivities,
Okay.
sourdough can be easier to digest.
So it's not just about taste.
No, it's about how our bodies handle it, too.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
What other good things does this fermentation do?
Well, it also increases the bioavailability of certain nutrients,
Bioavailability meaning?
meaning our bodies can absorb them better.
Okay.
I'm talking B vitamins, minerals, things like that.
That's good for you.
And there's even research suggesting sourdough has a lower glycemic index than other breads.
Glycemic index.
Yeah, I mean, it releases sugar into your bloodstream more slowly,
Okay, that makes sense.
which can be better for you.
So we've got ancient origins, this living starter that's doing all this cool stuff.
Right.
And it's potentially easier to digest and has more nutrients.
It's a pretty amazing bread.
It's a lot more than just sour bread.
It really is.
So our research also talks about some people who've been really influential in the sourdough world.
Oh, yeah, there are some big names.
Who should we know about?
Well, one name you hear all the time is Chad Robertson.
Chad Robertson.
He's like a sourdough artist,
Okay.
known for his super detailed techniques and his book, Tartine Bread.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
It's really influential. He's inspired so many home bakers.
That's awesome.
It is.
And speaking of sourdough history,
Yeah.
our sources talk about a specific time in America where it really took off.
You're talking about the California Gold Rush
Yeah, the gold rush.
in the late 1840s?
That's a long time ago.
It is. Imagine those prospectors heading west,
Yeah.
often for a long time
Right.
with very little supplies.
And sourdough was key for them.
Oh, yeah. It was robust. It provided essential sustenance.
So it was like the perfect food for that kind of life.
Exactly.
And that's where the term sourdough, like the nickname, came from.
That's right. Someone who'd spent a lot of time prospecting, relying on their sourdough starter.
Right.
They were called a sourdough.
A sourdough.
Became like a badge of honor.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it shows how important sourdough was to that time in American history.
So we've gone from ancient Egypt to the gold rush.
It's quite a journey.
It's a long story.
It is.
What are some of the most surprising things you found out about sourdough?
Well, get this. There are sourdough starters that have been passed down through families for over 100 years.
Like heirlooms?
Exactly like heirlooms.
Wow.
Each one with its own unique flavor profile.
That's amazing.
Imagine baking with a culture your great-great-grandparents might have used.
That blows my mind.
And the mix of yeasts and bacteria in a starter can change over time,
Really?
influenced by the environment and how it's fed.
So it's constantly evolving.
Yeah, it's alive and changing.
So cool. And we talked about the health benefits.
Yeah.
It's really good for you, it seems.
The fermentation really unlocks the good stuff from the grains.
Yeah, and it's gentler on our digestion than other breads.
Exactly. And when you look at the timeline,
The timeline.
it really shows how much people have always loved sourdough.
Okay, let's go through that timeline.
All right, so we start in ancient Egypt around 4000 BC.
4000 BC.
Then by the Middle Ages, it had spread all across Europe.
Becoming a staple.
Absolutely a staple.
Then 1848, the California Gold Rush.
Right.
Popularizing it in America.
Especially in the West.
And then the 1970s, San Francisco.
San Francisco, a sourdough haven.
And then, boom, the 2000s, the artisanal bread movement.
And sourdough's back in a big way.
All over the world, people are making it at home.
It's really come full circle.
So what's the takeaway here?
I think the takeaway is that sourdough is so much more than just a type of bread.
More than bread.
It's a connection to our culinary history.
To history.
It shows how resourceful people were back then.
Yeah.
And it's a delicious art form.
An art form.
That's still arriving today.
And you don't have to be a master baker to make it.
No, not at all.
Our sources say with a little patience and effort.
Anyone can bake sourdough.
Anyone can bake sourdough.
And what about you?
Me?
Yeah, what part of this sourdough deep dive resonated with you the most?
Honestly, I'm kind of thinking about starting my own starter now.
That's great.
So to wrap things up,
Yeah.
here's something to think about.
Okay.
That sourdough starter, it's a unique culture.
Right.
It's always changing and adapting.
It's alive.
So, in a way, each starter has its own story,
Its own story.
influenced by its environment and the person who takes care of it.
That's a nice way to put it.
And every loaf that comes out of that starter,
Yeah.
it's a new chapter in that story.
A new chapter.
So maybe it's time you started your own sourdough story.
Maybe it is.
What do you think?
I think it's a great idea.
Just think about it. Flour and water,
Simple ingredients.
and the incredible journey that can unfold.
Yeah.
It's a connection to the past,
The past.
a present-day satisfaction,
Satisfaction.
and a future full of deliciousness.
So much deliciousness.
Sourdough.